guys, thanks for tuning in. It's Monsoon's Violence Prevention Program. I'm Anali.
I'm Alex.
I'm James.
I'm Jaria.
I'm Ethan.
I'm Nathan.
So today's theme for this vlog/podcast is growth. So in order to grow, we need a foundation, and today we want to emphasize the roots, which is family and heritage, and just for us to understand our background. And everyone's gonna go around and just share some stories.
So I'll start. So I guess my story kind of starts with my parents. My parents were both immigrants. My mother was a war refugee from El Salvador, and my dad was fleeing poverty and ill, violence-stricken home from Mexico. So they both eventually came here, and they made the impossible journey to the U.S. border and eventually crossed, and now they are both still undocumented. But when they came here, they were both very scarred and traumatized from their experiences back home. So eventually they both just try to live normal lives here, and they both try to find jobs, but as you may know, it was very hard for them because of their immigration status as undocumented immigrants that didn't have papers, but also the fact that they couldn't speak English, so there was a big language barrier. So they weren't very able to communicate with anyone really. My mom came here and she didn't even know how to ask where the bathroom was. Anyway, so down the road, my parents met and they got married. And then they had my sister and I. But soon after that, when I turned 5, my parents divorced. And it was because my mother realized her sexual orientation as lesbian. So after that, my parents divorced, and I was basically raised single-handedly by my mother. And that's when I really started to see the strength of my mother, because she had to work 4 to 5 jobs just to provide for my sister and I, and again, very low-paying jobs. But through that time, she stayed true to herself. As an undocumented immigrant Latina woman, she was a minority on many levels and faced a lot of discrimination, obviously. And that affected her opportunity for jobs. And through all of that, she stayed true to herself and still found a way to serve our community and continue her passion for social work. And now that really taught me a lesson, because in a world where the darker one's skin is, the darker one may feel closer to dirt. It forced me to see my own skin color and identity, and to watch my mom, it made me it gave me pride for my own community, for my people, but also to stay true to myself and accept my heritage and become my best self. That's my story.
Thank you for sharing.
Just so you guys know, in the description or just somewhere floating around, there will be a document with all of our stories and others of people's and their families' stories, just in general. Yeah.
Alright, I'll go next. So my parents grew up in South Korea. They're actually next door neighbors growing up. And then my dad's side immigrated to America. And then, so that was about when my dad was like probably 15, 16. So he had to go to Des Moines Technical, which is like Central Campus now. And he like didn't know any English, so he had to learn English. And then there, he learned English. Then he so he has, let's see, one older brother, and then a younger sister and younger brother. So basically him and my younger, and his younger sister, my aunt, they basically had to work part-time jobs and then help my grandparents to pay off the house stuff, payments. So he did that like basically until he went to college for cosmetology, and then he became a hairstylist with his uncle. And then he basically kept in touch with my mom when she was still in Korea, and then he called her and then asked her to marry him, and then she said yes, so she flew over. And then my mom didn't know English at all, so she had to work like really low paying jobs, and then like they basically started from the ground up to where we are now. So like, so my dad's opened up his shop on his own in like 2003, and then that like brought in more income. So then we started a family, they started a family, and then I have 3 older sisters, and then it's me. And my mom still, like, her English isn't like perfect, but, and like she didn't go to college, so she's still working like kind of like low paying jobs still, but it has like health benefits, so that's why she's still doing it. But I think they just taught me like how to work hard and earn everything you get, and they've just taught me a lot, and I'm just grateful to have them as parents because they just taught me everything I know, and like just be grateful for what you have.
Thanks, Alex. I'll go next. So my parents both grew up in China. My mom grew up in the city, whereas my dad grew up as a farmer in a rural area. And so they led pretty different lives in terms of setting, but both of my parents grew up in relatively poor families, so they would have to work a lot to help make ends meet for their families. Eventually what happened was they met in college in China, and after that, my mom actually received some money to study in the United States at a state university, and so she pursued that, and my dad tagged along, studying English along the way, trying to earn an education in the United States, and eventually they both got scholarship money to study in the United States, and so they did that, and while they were studying, they had my sister, and so they kind of realized that, you know, it might be better for them to stay in the United States because the education opportunities were a little stronger, and they wanted a better life for my sister and, you know, my brother and I. But it was really hard for them trying to make that transition. They spoke very poor English, even though they were able to manage themselves in their classes. They didn't really have any connections in the United States. All the extended family remains in China, and so they were really all we have. And that's just kind of taught me lessons about how important it is to kind of stick with your family and stay true to that. In Chinese culture, it's very important to kind of honor ancestors and respect family elders, but in my family, you know, we didn't have access to that type of tradition and that type of like honor. In the United States, we had no one else to connect with to help us, to support in return, and so it's just kind of taught me to really be thankful for the family that I do have, and to make sure that you know, I'm always sticking with them.
Okay, I guess I'll share next. So both of my parents were born and raised in Somalia, and around the time they were like getting out of high school, a civil war broke out, and there's just a lot of violence happening in Somalia. So they decided to, they got married, and then they decided to immigrate to America. And this is like a really hard journey for them, as they barely knew English. They didn't know anyone in America besides my uncle, who lived in Wisconsin. So they had to come here, and there was 4 of us. It was like me and my little sister, my 2 older brothers. They had to work really hard, you know, find jobs that would be able to provide for the 6 of us, and then also sending money back home, because my dad left his whole family there, his mom, dad, and his younger sibling, since he's the oldest. And it was just really hard for my parents, but as time went on, they just worked really hard, went back to school, found better paying jobs, and my parents were, like, my dad was able to go back and visit his family, and my mom was able to do that too. But I would say my parents have taught me the importance of like working hard, and just knowing that they sacrificed a lot to get me and my siblings where we are today just makes me want to work harder and try my best in everything that I do.
Sure. So I won't talk a lot about my grandparents' story because you'll be able to read it. But the thing that I took away from my parents coming to the United States was that everything gets better over time. So if you read the story, after the whole struggle of coming to the United States, my parents are now completely thriving. They have stable jobs, they own their own house, and they have some children that never make it boring. And considering their journey that they had to go through to come here, I think it's a pretty good upgrade. Anytime there's a problem like that I'm struggling with, whether it's like at school or work or something, I always think about what my grandparents and my parents went through and the pain and the joy that they had to go through, that they experienced when they came here. And I always know that people will get through it. There's a good quote which was, "There will always be a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just sometimes hard to find." But just like my parents and their parents, when you get through, it's always better. So after hearing their story, I really do think that I always think that it's going to get better.
Okay, so about my family, when my dad was 3, he had to flee China because it was a communist country, and it was just too dangerous. So all 10 of his siblings, his father and mother, left to come to America, and none of them knew English. They didn't speak any English, and they had to work really hard just to survive out there. And when my mom was like really young, she came to her father swam across a river in Laos twice and brought his whole family along to a camp, I think in Thailand, and they were flown out to America, and then her mother connected with someone in Iowa, and that's how it all came together. Well, they both, my father and mother, they had very big struggles, being one that they didn't know any English at all, so they had to work really hard to learn English, to fit into the society, to gather friends, find a way to continue living in America. It was really hard. So the message that I took away from their past was just to work hard and it gets better. Like Ethan said, they have stable jobs, they have a home that they bought on their own. They just worked hard and they earned what they got.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching as well as listening. This is the Violence Prevention team. So today's podcast has been dedicated to helping everyone explore and understand the importance of their histories, and we hope that you took something away from listening. Thank you guys.
Thank you.